Welcome to Growing Your Firm, brought to you by Jetpack Workflow. Here's your host, David Cristello.
Hey everybody, David Cristello here, founder and CEO of Jetpack Workflow and host of Growing Your Firm podcast. Today's guest is Laurence Whittam. He's the managing director at Impact Global Solutions, where he helps teach CPA firms how to build successful outsourced teams. We were talking about this world a little bit ago. We had the opportunity to meet in person, and we've had a number of different providers on the show, and the state of the world in the industry is that it's not a matter of can you find somebody. I think it's really become a matter of who do you pick and how do you assess and how do you realize what's a good fit for you may not be a good fit for the other firm, and what's the criteria and what's the variables and what's the best practices. And so I was talking with Laurence. He goes, hey, that is my world. And I said, brilliant. Why don't you come on the show and let's chat about it? So with all that said, Laurence, welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Yeah, nice to be here.
Yeah, and you offer a pretty unique offering. Before we get into some of the maybe examples we can get into, or some of the things folks need to keep in mind as they're selecting an agency to work with, help us understand just a little bit further, what do you do on a day-to-day basis and who do you typically do it for? Is there a specific type of CPA or size CPA firm, or is it just spread across the industry?
So honestly, it's spread across the industry. So I work with the small solo practitioners that honestly don't even have a full book of business yet, but they've started to leverage outsourcing in some capacity, right? And they're struggling in some way, up to a top 20 firm right now, where they've got a sizable team and they're working in different sites internationally, and they just needed some support on best practices, helping train some internal staff on the tax side of things, what the communication, the culture aspects, and just understanding best practices really in the industry. So it's a big range, really.
Yeah, got it. And to be clear, are you providing outsourced services, or are you helping them assess and set up and figure out who's the right agency to work with?
Yeah, so I'm actually helping them assess everything. So I don't have my own back office. I was in the provider side of it for the past 10 years, and that's really where I built a lot of my experience. I worked with a CPA firm, so I got the understanding of the internal processes that was going on as well for a couple of years. And really, I just saw a big gap in the market that nobody was really helping the CPA firm understand the best practices, how to do it, being a bit more neutral and figuring out, okay, what's the best option for them, rather than just really saying, yes, we can do that, and then finding staff for them, but not necessarily having a process in place and not being the best provider for them at that point in time.
Okay.
So now I get to pick between.
Okay, interesting. When somebody comes to you, have they already been burned by outsourcing in the past, or they say, hey, this world looks interesting? I guess walk us through maybe a prototypical client, if you will, for you.
Yeah, so there's sort of two types of clients, right? So it's the first one is they've never tried outsourcing, or they've tried outsourcing, it didn't work for them, right? But they're currently not doing it, right? So that's more what I do with them is I have more of a discovery call. I understand who they are, right? Try to get an understanding for the processes they have, what type of service they really need, and even what type of management system they have, right? Because some people need a bit more handholding than other people, right? And they want to just be able to pass on the work and just get it done. Other people really like the connection with their employees and team members, and they want that, right? So then I will go through like somewhat of a brokering side of the business, right? Where I then figure that out and then put them in touch with some organizations that I feel are a good fit for them, and then go through the steps with them. Okay, here, let's go through this. Let's get an interview set up. Let's make sure you understand who you're going to hire, what the process is. And then they go and they have a direct contract with the outsourcing. And I do that more complimentary, right? I make the outsourcing firms pay for that piece of it as like a lead gen, right? So that I can provide as much service to the firm as possible, right? I want to get the best solution for them, right? Wherever it is.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So what is your business model? Or is the client paying you, or is the outsourced agency also paying you, or who's the...
Yeah, so it's not double dipping in that sense. So the brokering side of it, it's the outsourcing firm, right? I see that as they're already approaching the firms, right? The CPAs, the accountants. So I can get a fee from them for putting them in touch with these accounting firms, right? And actually setting them up the proper way with them to work. And then for any of like my coaching, my best practice training, my consulting aspect, right? That is the CPA firm paying me for those pieces.
I see. Okay. So let's dive into the wonderful world of coaching then. A number of firms will do their own, they'll try to implement their own process. What do you see is the difference, or do you have an example of where you would dig in where a lot of firms ignore, or what does that look like that differs for them trying to self-implement?
Yeah, so it's a lot of firms, even some of the larger firms, they don't have their processes down pat and documented, right? And there's documented in a couple of ways, right? Creating a standard operating procedure on paper so that it's written out step by step as to how to do something, but also then like doing a video recording and setting it up. And now there's like great tools that you can use where you can record yourself. It'll break it down into a step by step guide, right? Generally, it's making sure they understand that working with an outsourcing firm, they have to have very sound processes, right? Because now you're looking at somebody that hasn't had the same experience. They're not sat next to you where they can watch over your shoulder and do it, right? So you have to show them as well as just saying, hey, please go and do this, right? So it's generally the process piece and the communication aspect is like two big pieces to outsourcing that if it's not set up initially, they're just going to struggle from the start.
I hear you. So the way I'm hearing what you're saying, you correct me if I'm wrong, is maybe folks that have not successfully gone down the outsourcing path, they might be hiring within their country. We'll just call it the States. So you're hired within the States. Maybe they're co-located, maybe not, but you can virtually or in person look over somebody's shoulder and just try to download your brain through one-to-one conversations. But when you enter the world of outsourcing, you're handing over a Word doc or a Google Doc and videos. You're not doing the virtual touch base that you might be used to with a in-house full-time employee. So you provide the process documentation and the video documentation to essentially onboard and train up the outsourced hire. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's typically because, again, when you're working with somebody and you're hiring them in the States, like next to you, or even like we do hire a lot more virtually now, but it's still quite new to a lot of people hiring virtually, even within the States. So we're just not used to that same level of communication. And we don't get on a call. You don't necessarily have as much stuff in common with somebody that's international as you do that is in the States and is supporting the same type of sports as you do and stuff like that. So you don't have that interpersonal relationship as quickly as you do with somebody international, right? So it then becomes, it's not a bad thing, but you don't necessarily want to spend as much time on the phone and getting to know them. And that's typically not what they do. They see it as, no, I'm hiring them to work. You just don't end up spending as much time, which is not the right way, right? Which is what I'm trying to educate people on.
Yeah, help us understand what is the real difference between these different outsourcing firms. There must be differences. I'm not well ingrained in the space. We've obviously had a few folks on the podcast in the past that provided outsourcing services and back office support. But what's the real variable between one over another?
So there's a couple of variables, right? The first is location, right? And the reason why location is important is because you've got the primary areas are India, the Philippines, which are the most common right now. You've got South Africa, and then South America is coming up pretty soon, right? And you've got different time zones in each area. So some people, if they really like to interact with their team, you can't do it as much with India or the Philippines. A lot of them will work night shifts so that you've got some overlap, right? But then you get burnout quicker in talent as well, right? You get health problems come up if you're working like nights all the time and stuff like that. So you've got to take all those things into consideration. So timing's a big play. Communication is another one, right? People go to the Philippines more so for like virtual admins and the basic accounting, bookkeeping, because they're better communicators typically. As a whole, on average, they are better communicators. Their accent is more palpable to a lot of people. Same thing with South Africa. South Africa's great at accounting and audit, right? So you've got skill sets that are different in places as well. You're not going to find tax in South Africa or Mexico or South America right now. There just hasn't been the same level of involvement from tax preparation, for example, compared to India, right, over the years. So it's actually like a culmination of a lot of different aspects that firms just don't know to even ask themselves internally before they even go and start outsourcing. Really.
Yeah, because one would think that South America would be great for the time zone overlap.
Yep.
But you're saying the skill set's not there, and then when you also look at the investment, is it a similar hourly fee or retainer fee? Is Philippines, I think historically maybe it'd been the cheapest. Is it still the cheapest? Like how's the cost structure look between different territories?
So I would say it's typically India being the most cost effective. Then you go up a small margin up to the Philippines. Okay. You've got South America then. Mexico's a little bit more expensive than South America, like in terms of Brazil, Argentina areas, right? They're a bit more cost effective, similar to the Philippines. But then you've got Mexico, and then you've got South Africa being probably one of the more expensive areas, more similar to us, but you still have savings, right? You still have a 25-30% savings, whereas you have closer to 50 to 60% in India, for example, compared to traditional staff.
Yeah, that's interesting. And when firms, I guess, what is the best way for you to integrate, or do they think about integrating this talent? Because I feel like there could be two schools of thought. I assume the former is going to be the more popular one, which is, hey, we have this team over here, and they're over there, and they have a job, and there's a baton that gets passed. Versus people that, okay, no, we're going to ingrain them in the culture. We want them to be on team meetings. We're going to maybe not do as rigid one-on-ones, but we're going to check in with them. We want them to really feel part of the team. Is it a coin flip for what people do? Does one work better than the other? Or how should folks approach this concept?
So and that's where it's a question of the firm, right? So some people are very good managers, right? In terms of even just leaders, right? In firms, and you probably see that, right? Some firms like to integrate their team. They do a very good job of keeping people motivated by doing that. Other people don't really want to keep adding teams, but they're great at what they do and they can scale if they get the work done. But it's, again, a certain personality. So I would say it's very much a coin flip of, do I want an outsourcing firm that is very much taking control of all those aspects for me, right? Managing the team, making sure they're taking them out to dinners, making sure they take all those interpersonal type relationships off my hands and they just get the job done for me, right? There are firms that will do that and are very hands-on with the management aspect, but you have to be very hands-on then with the process and reporting and feedback to make sure the deliverables are up to the standard you need. There are a lot of other firms that prefer like people, right? They like to know the people they're working with. So I feel like a lot of smaller firms much prefer to know exactly, yes, this is my person. I know the exact person I'm working with. I want to grow a relationship. I want them involved in all these team meetings. And they integrate them fully into their culture, which is fine. But there are different firms that you can go to for those different management styles, right? One firm may tell you they can do it, both, but typically they can't, from my experience, right? They personally have their own culture in the organizations that they want to spread. Other ones just do more of a hiring and staffing side of it. So it is a question internally you have to ask before you go ahead.
Okay, got it. And is it similar to introducing outsourced service providers to the client? So you hire somebody from South Africa, what have you. At any point, do they get introduced or CC'd in client communications, or are they walled off?
Yeah. No, so and again, it depends on the person a lot of the time. So it's not step one. And I would always hesitate to say, don't hire your first outsourced person, like looking for them to do like client communication immediately and stuff like that. Like you have to take them under your wing a little bit, train them first, make sure the process is there. But a lot of firms, like I've got a lot of small firms I've worked with over the years that have integrated them fully, and their staff were actually in the offshore centers were actually more of the client interaction piece than their even in-house team, right? Just because their in-house team wasn't as experienced as the external staff, right? They could answer more of the higher, more technical questions in some cases, but it took a few years to get there, right? It's not a short-term thing where you want to just jump straight into it.
Hey, Growing a Firm community, David here. Just want to share a quick note about Jetpack Workflow, our accounting workflow software. Now, for almost a decade, we've helped 5,000 plus accountants, bookkeepers, and firm owners use Jetpack Workflow to better organize accounting workflows, automate recurring tasks, and easily track and monitor client work. Never miss a deadline again. Stop using messy Post-it notes, generic tools, legacy systems, or spreadsheets to handle workflows and bring sanity to your client work. Now head on over to jetpackworkflow.com. That's jetpackworkflow.com to get started with a 14-day free trial or schedule a one-on-one demo with us. All right, now let's get back to the show. Got it. Do people so a while ago, actually quite some time ago now, for our engineering talent, we used one of these, we didn't go with an agency, but we used this platform, it was this matchmaking service, we'll call it. And we found them. And at some point, because we wanted to offer grant options. We're like, we should really just buy out his contract. And we had to put down, I forget what it was, call it $10-ish thousand to buy him out of the relationship with the platform and work with us directly. And we got additional benefits, and we'd fly him up to retreats. He really became a full-time team member. We obviously don't do that for everyone. We've had other contracts we haven't. Does that concept exist in the world of accounting, where you're buying out contracts from the places you source the talent from?
Yeah, it does now. So I would say that it hasn't been a preferred model for a lot of outsourcing firms. And again, you need to know if that's you're envisioning to do that in the future, for example, and you want to build your own team, especially, then again, I typically work with the firms in the contract stage as well. So I negotiate certain aspects where you can have a buyout stage down the line, right? We can also put that in place initially so that maybe you hit a certain piece of time and then you can go to the next level with them. Okay, so it's different structures that you can definitely have.
What are some other gotchas that happen? Not gotchas, but maybe leverage points or things that people maybe ignore in the contract negotiation?
So I would say initially it's that lock-in period, right? So when you're in the testing phases, it's good to get an understanding of how it works, especially when it's your first step into the water. So you don't want to get locked into a contract where now you're committing for a full year or two to an individual that you haven't even tested yet. You've done an interview maybe, but you haven't really tested their skill sets. Anybody can say anything on an interview at the end of the day. So I really push for a lot of individuals to have more of a trial period with a lot of firms, have a 2-3 month span. Invest that time. Don't treat it as, we've got to let's test one project and done. 2-3 months that you get a good understanding, but now you've got an option to get out of those contracts sometimes, right? So you've got a bit more flexibility, and also testing during that interview stage, right? It's not just setting up hey, listen, here's my interview questions, but really testing some of the knowledge parts of it, right? Do some trial work before you necessarily commit, because then you get an understanding for the work that's going to come back as well, where it's at currently. So now you can set your expectations, right? Because that's the worst, when your expectations are here, you get work delivered at this point. Now frustration immediately goes through the roof, right? So it's items like that that are just so helpful, just to even just bring down or bring the level of expectation to what it should be.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thinking about that a little bit further in the assessment period, how do you think about what are the non-negotiables? It feels like obviously, if you're hiring for tax, they need to do tax, but how important is it that they're familiar with the platforms you're using, QuickBooks versus Xero versus Sage, or Lacerte versus Drake versus some other one? As you're hiring, are people over-reliant on their talent knowing these platforms day one, or is that a kind of an appropriate must-have that they need when they're assessing talent?
So in my experience, I think when they're looking for talent, they have a preference to say, yes, I want somebody that's worked on these systems, the exact systems. From my experience working with the outsourcing, they typically have worked, like, as a company, they've got people and experts in a lot of different softwares. If you're working with a decent sized outsourcing firm, at least. So the software isn't necessarily the key area, right? You should be looking for somebody that you can groom, you can work with, you have a good relationship with, right? You like to talk to them in that sense, right? You can see the level of knowledge is there, right, that you really need, compared to necessarily the software. There's a lot of software interchangeably that's quite similar, right, where they'll learn it, right, very quickly, right? Very talented individuals, and especially in a lot of these countries like India, the Philippines, South Africa, it's so competitive because there's just huge populations that education is like the core piece, right? They all go for their master's programs. They all then go for their chartered accounting degrees or CPAs and EAs, and they always looking at the next step from a knowledge perspective. So like they're just used to learning, right? So they are happy to learn this different technology.
That's amazing. I know we're going to be butting up against time here soon. Just a couple maybe final questions. You mentioned South America is really on the rise. Is that where I was going to go? Are there any countries or territories that are the next generation? Is it South America? Are there also other countries popping up as well that are surfacing really amazing talent?
So I'm seeing countries all over that are really opening up to providing talent for the US, right? I think that, again, South America probably being the most recent in Mexico. And the reason being is that there are companies like larger organizations, public companies like Exxon and stuff that have been having finance talent over there, right? So having tax teams over there, but they haven't worked in public accounting necessarily.
Nice.
So there may be and again, there may be a PwC is everywhere, and EY is everywhere. But other than outside of the big four, there hasn't been other firms that are necessarily in those areas, but it's very preferential from the time zone. It's bilingual. So now you can have in Florida, Texas, in California, where there's a lot of bilingual clients, like now you can have them talk to them, communicate with them as well. So huge benefits to those areas. I would just say the big thing is a lot of people are also taking advantage of the talent crunch, right? So everybody's talking about the staffing shortage. There's lots of talent out there, right? And it's just that there's so many now little small firms coming up that don't necessarily have the security in place, don't have the processes in place yet, but they may have a couple of people that are very talented. But especially in an industry like ours, like it's where data has to be secure. So try not to just jump onto the bandwheel of, okay, they offer me the best price, because they don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place. So you've got to ask those questions and see the facilities. Work from home. We don't let people work from a Dunkin' ourselves. So don't let them in the outsource side of it, right?
Yeah. So do you think the concept of the talent crunch is just either way overblown or just it's because we're so US centric?
I think it's partially because we're very US centric, right? There is talent available. Like I know of at least 500 accountants, tax preparers, auditors that could be placed tomorrow in different between the organizations that I know of, different countries, right? So literally tomorrow they could be placed, right? So it's not about that piece. Now, the demographic in terms of people are leaving the industry, so it needs to change, right? The baby boomers are leaving, right? There's a big amount of people leaving, so it's going to hit. It's not going to get any better right now, but it's more of a lack of understanding of how to leverage the talent that is available. And where we talk about, the industry's talking about, okay, get people from different industries, bring them in, financial analysts, bring them in, train them. But there's people that are actually trained on US accounting and tax that you can leverage. But you've got to get over different barriers like communication, culture, and areas like that where it's just different for people.
Yeah, and I'm going to say this, I don't mean to demean the amount of hard work that's probably associated with executing some kind of concept like this. And I also know it's easy for me to say and harder for people to do. But gosh almighty, there's so much opportunity with baby boomers retiring. They probably are profitable businesses, but you're buying them at 1x-ish top line revenue. And maybe less. I talked with a firm owner and he purchased it for it was significantly less than 1x. They probably don't have packaging in a modern way, so they're probably not doing subscription bundles. They probably haven't done a price increase in a while. The talent has probably not been reviewed. You can look at outsourcing. You can look at both upskilling existing talent, leveraging existing talent, and then as you grow, look at outsourcing to think about your margins. There's obviously a huge wave of technology that can be utilized inside of these firms. And so I feel like for the right entrepreneurial firm owner, gosh, the sky's the limit, because there's going to be all these clients. Like we always talk about the baby boomers retiring. Behind them is a business, and behind them are hundreds, if not thousands of clients per firm that are going to be looking for new leadership. They're going to be looking for the new accountant. And I just think there's going to be so much opportunity that's happening over the next decade, 2 decades for impact to clients, impact to the team, personal and community wealth creation. So I think there is a sky is falling mentality that's happening a little bit in the industry. Like, I can't believe AI is here and then nobody's working in the profession. Oh, the good news is business owners usually do not care all that much about their finances. They care that it's in their bank account, but they're not reviewing the books. They're not thinking strategically about where to go with their cash. They're not thinking strategically about where to resource their capital, and they need a partner. And so thinking about this convergence of AI and outsourcing, smarter packaging, the baby boomers retiring, there is just a huge opportunity for these firms. So I'll get off my horse for a second, but man, hearing you talk, I'm like, there's 500 talented people that could be sourced tomorrow that you know of.
Yeah, and exactly what you're saying, right? There's an opportunity here for firms to even leverage that talent elsewhere. So you hear of firms culling clients, right? So there's a trickle-down effect. But rather than culling the clients, you could actually expand service offerings in a lot of these areas. Like, again, a lot of firms don't want to take on the payroll. A lot of firms don't want to take on the accounts receivable, accounts payable. There's a lot of businesses with huge finance teams that, again, they're struggling to find finance people too, right? So now if you able to tap into that and say, listen, let me take your whole finance side of it off the table. Obviously, you got your CFO, you got your controller. Let me just handle it for you, right? You can now do it at a much more cost-effective rate, but there needs to be strict processes and a control in place, and you need to get used to it, but there's talent there ready to go.
Yeah, I was just done an interview yesterday about what it looks like to scale CAS, client accounting services, client advisory services. And there's a point in which you go from doing a little bit of forecasting, a little bit of benchmarking to doing full-blown CFO services, controller services. And one of the biggest fears at that time is there's a pretty large investment to source that within the States. So you have full-time plus benefit plus tax. And this is just an example of where you can, if you take a step back and think about first principles about what you want to do, there's a lot of optionality available for how you build your team.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's going to be a combination of multiple things, right? It's not just about the talent. Like you said multiple times, like regarding the AI and regarding just technology, you've got to be on top of those pieces and elements too. And that's where, again, workflow systems, like some practice management systems, like a lot of firms that are smaller don't necessarily invest in those earlier on, whereas they help organize everything. They keep it running very clearly, more like a process, and it gets you used to that system compared to necessarily just filling out Excel spreadsheets with what projects you have.
Yeah. So what Laurence is trying to say, if you're not using Jetpack, what have you been doing with your time here? Anyways, Laurence, it's been a blast. If somebody wants to reach out and say thank you, learn more about what you do, what's the best way for our community to connect with you?
Yeah, I'm all over LinkedIn, so feel free to just look me up at Laurence Whittam, or you can contact me at 908-202-5850. Probably a text message first. Don't everybody call me at once, but we'll set up a time that way.
Yeah, and I'll put out another call to action. We talked about how firms are modernizing using outsourced talent. If that's you and you're listening, come on the show, talk about it. Laurence, firms that are doing it, clients of yours, bring them on the show, talk about it. Give reference, we'll give credit where credit's due, but email me, david@jetpackworkflow.com. We'll get you queued up for an interview. If you enjoyed today's interview, we're going to do all the show notes at jetpackworkflow.com/blog. That's jetpackworkflow.com/blog. If you really enjoyed today's interview, leave a review. It helps us get a word out. And if Laurence said something that really ignited new idea, new concept, new framework, share it with a fellow firm owner, leader, partner that needed to hear this information. Laurence, it's been a real treat to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thanks, David. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining Growing Your Firm, the podcast series for global, small, and medium-sized businesses ready to scale and increase profits. You can check out more podcasts by following the links in the show notes. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. At Jetpack Workflow, we're all about maximizing returns for accounting firms and CPAs. Check out more podcasts on growing your firm and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.